I came at wedding of my daughter, but she said, "Dad, you're not invited." She was about to marry with her boyfriend, and those words pierced deeper into my heart than any blade could, because never in my life did I imagine that the little girl I once carried on my shoulders, the one whose laughter was my music and whose tears were my storms, would one day look me in the eye and speak with such coldness, as though I were a stranger who had no place in her life, no role in her happiness, no presence in her world. And in that moment my heart collapsed under the weight of years of love, years of sacrifice, years of sleepless nights and broken bones, all for her sake, and yet I was treated as nothing more than a shadow unworthy of standing by her side on the biggest day of her life. And I looked at her standing there in her glowing white dress, her eyes filled not with love for her father, but with fire lit by someone else's words, poisoned by the whispers of a man who never once knew the nights I starved so she could eat, the mornings I walked to work so she could go to school in clean clothes, the evenings I returned home tired but still forced to smile because she wanted to tell me about her day, and I thought of the countless birthdays I struggled to make special, even when I had nothing in my pocket but hope. I thought of the promises I made to her when she was young, that I would always protect her, always guide her, always love her no matter what. And yet here I stood, an unwanted guest in the life of my own daughter, humiliated in front of strangers who looked at me with pity and curiosity, whispering among themselves as though I were some shameful secret exposed in the light of her celebration. And as her groom stood beside her, proud and arrogant, I could almost see in his eyes the satisfaction of having driven a wedge between us, of having replaced me, of having claimed the most precious thing in my life while pushing me out like a beggar. And though my throat tightened and my eyes burned with tears that begged to fall, I did not allow myself to break in front of them. I did not allow them to see me shattered. Instead, I turned quietly, my footsteps heavy as though the earth itself was rejecting me, and I walked out into the cold night, where the laughter and music from inside sounded like cruel mockery, each cheer stabbing deeper into my heart. And as I stood in the darkness, I asked myself what I had done to deserve this, what sin I had committed as a father, that my daughter would choose to erase me from her story. But even in that storm of grief, a strange fire lit within me. Not just sorrow, not just anger, but a silent oath that this was not the end, that the world has a way of turning tables, that life has its own justice, and one day my daughter and the man she chose over me would come to understand the weight of the father they discarded, the man they humiliated. And when that day came, there would be no comfort left for them, because I would rise again from this humiliation, and the revenge I would carve would not be of violence or blood, but of fate itself, teaching them the price of betrayal. And in that moment, under the cruel moonlight, I swore I would not forgive. I swore I would not forget. And I swore that the story they began by throwing me out of their lives would end only when they begged for the presence of the very man they cast away. After that night, life became nothing but a long road of loneliness and silence, and I remember walking away from that wedding hall with the sound of drums and laughter chasing me like ghosts, each beat echoing the truth that I had been erased from my daughter's happiness. And when I reached my small, dimly lit home, the walls themselves felt colder, emptier, as though even the house had abandoned me because the person I built my whole world for no longer needed me, and the bed that once carried the weight of a father's dreams and sleepless nights now felt like a coffin where I buried my pride, my love, and my reason to live. And I sat there for hours staring at the faded pictures on the wall, the photographs of a smiling little girl holding my hand, the memories of her first steps, her first words, the days when she called me her hero, her protector. And the cruel irony cut deeper, because the same lips that once called me Dad with pride had spoken to me like I was an intruder. And as days turned into weeks, the world became harsher. People who once respected me as a father now whispered behind my back. Neighbors looked at me with pity, and some even with mockery, asking why I had been left out of the wedding, as though my own daughter's betrayal was a reflection of my failure as a man. And I could not escape their words, because everywhere I went, I saw reminders of her absence, in the children who walked with their fathers in the market, in the sound of laughter, coming from families eating together. And my heart ached because I knew my daughter was laughing too, but not with me, not for me, instead with the man she had chosen over my blood. and I heard from others how well they were living, how her husband had bought a new car, how they traveled, how she wore jewelry and dresses more expensive than anything she had ever dreamed of in my house. And though people spoke with admiration, to me, it felt like salt on a wound that refused to heal. Because every success they had seemed to be built on the ashes of my humiliation. And the more I tried to forgive, the more the pain sharpened. Because forgiveness felt like weakness, and weakness was something they wanted from me. They wanted me to vanish quietly, to fade into nothingness, but I could not, I would not. Because even as my body grew weaker and my bones ached with age, a fire was burning inside me stronger than ever before. A fire of revenge, not the blind rage of a young man, but the patient, calculated storm of a father who has been wronged beyond measure. And I began to see their laughter not as victory but as arrogance, the kind of arrogance that always blinds people before they fall. And I waited, quietly, silently, like a shadow, because I knew life always opens doors. And when the moment came when fate presented me with the chance to strike back, I would be ready. And the same daughter who threw me away like dirt, the same man who smiled at my pain, would come to know what it means to betray the man who raised her. And when that day came, I swore, the world would see who was truly forgotten and who was unforgettable. Years passed, and though I lived like a shadow in the eyes of the world, inside me the storm never died, and I watched from afar as my daughter and her husband built their so-called perfect life, a life I had once dreamed of giving her. And every time I saw them driving past in their new cars, wearing expensive clothes, hosting gatherings where laughter spilled into the streets, I clenched my fists not out of jealousy, but out of the bitter reminder that I had been cast aside like trash. And I kept telling myself that fate always keeps a balance, and indeed it did, because one night I received news that shook the ground beneath their arrogant feet. Her husband James had invested heavily in a business with shady partners, men who promised him riches but were wolves in disguise. And slowly their empire of pride began to crumble. Debts rose, whispers of fraud circled the community, and soon those same friends who once praised them turned their backs. And I watched them fall from grace with a cold satisfaction. But I did not stop there, no. Because revenge is not merely watching someone suffer, it is making sure they feel the same knife they once twisted in your chest. And so I began to feed the rumors, adding fuel to the fire, whispering truths and half-truths into the right ears, ensuring their shame spread further. And soon James was summoned to court, dragged in front of the law like a criminal, and my daughter, the same one who once told me I wasn't welcome at her wedding, now stood in public with her head bowed, her pride shattered, the stares of people cutting her deeper than any words. And I could have gone to her. I could have offered my hand like a father would, but instead I stood back, letting her taste the same isolation she had forced upon me, letting her know what it feels like to be abandoned when you need someone most. And as James's downfall grew heavier, their home seized, their luxuries stripped away, I saw her wandering with the same helpless eyes I once had the night she broke me, and though my heart trembled with old love, I silenced it with the memory of her rejection, for revenge was no longer just justice, it was the closure I needed. And one evening, as she finally came to my doorstep, broken, desperate, her voice trembling as she said, "Dad, I need you." I looked into her eyes, the same eyes that once looked at me with disdain, and I answered with a calm that froze her. "Soul, where was this voice the night you told me I didn't belong in your life? Where was this hand when I was thrown out into the darkness? You chose your path, now live with it." And I closed the door on her just as she had once closed her heart on me, and as I turned away, I felt no joy, no triumph, only a heavy silence. But in that silence was peace, for I had given her the lesson life had denied her, and I had finally taken back the dignity that was stolen from me, and though I was alone, I was no longer broken, because revenge had not just destroyed them, it had rebuilt me.